Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos. Today's block I call Liza. It's a 17-inch finished block, very big block. I saw a video from the YouTube channel was called Liza Decor. So I don't know if that's the name of the person or just the channel name. It's one of those videos that there's no talking, there's just text on the screen and you watch what they're doing. She cut 6-inch squares to make, it's actually a disappearing hourglass type block. But I changed it a little bit because I have layer cakes I wanted to use, so that's why it's so big. And I'll show you the iterations I went through, but I changed and add triangles in the corners here. Here's what 4 blocks look like put block to block. And here are the fabric requirements for 1 block. We use 10-inch squares, so you can use your layer cakes or any other 10-inch squares. For the background, you'll need 2 squares. And we're going to draw a diagonal line on the back of each square. I'll show you that. Then the accent fabrics, you need 2, so 1 square of each of those. And for the corner triangle, you'll need 1 square as well. We're going to cut that corner triangle into 4 squares, 4.5 inches. Here are the instructions, and we're going to go over that. So the large half square triangles, then we'll stitch and flip the little triangles in each corner. We'll sew them together into this hourglass unit. Cut it 4 times. Move around some pieces and stitch it back together. And this block is a variation of the block demonstrated on the YouTube channel Liza Decor. The video is called Quick Sewing with Just Squares. If you click or scan this code, you can go to see that video. And I also have a link in the description below this video. Let me show you the different iterations I went through when testing out this block. This is the first one. Let me take this off. You can see through it. This is the first one I did. It's just like what Liza did, but it's only larger. These were done with 10-inch squares, not 6-inch squares. And since it is so big, I didn't like all this white space here. And if you put them block to block, you'll have even bigger white space. Now, if you have a lot of quilting, you want to quilt a beautiful design in this large space, this is a perfect way to showcase your quilting designs. So you might not want to put this triangle up here. And I also found out that this large print square does not work well here. There's the squares, the accent fabrics really need to be sort of similar to each other in texture. So this is a scrap one now. And my next thing I did was to add, I chose a different fabric. I used one of the same fabrics, and I added another triangle on each corner, and this is what came out. So when you put block to block, you'll have an hourglass unit between each block. So I really did like this, and this is what we're going with for today's video. And since I had a stack of these red and white layer cake squares, I had a stack of solid white, and then I had a stack of mostly medium to dark red and white squares, and then these were the lighter background squares. So I'm going to put the lighter backgrounds in these corners and the medium to dark inside the block with the background as a solid white. And at the end, I'll have instructions for piecing 3 different sizes of quilts using these blocks. So now let's get started with the block. To make this block, it would be helpful if you have a square ruler. This one is 10 inches because we're going to be cutting one of these squares into 4.5-inch squares, and we'll get to that later. But if you have a 10-inch ruler, square ruler, that would help. Also, if you have, this is a 2.5-inch by 18.5-inch ruler. Move this. And we'll need this for drawing our diagonal line on the 10-inch square, and also when we're ready to cut the large pieced square into 9 pieces, this will help. 18.5-inch is really good for that. Here are the fabrics I've chosen. This is the corner triangle fabric. That's the light background with red. And we'll cut this into 4 4.5-inch squares. These are the 2 accent fabrics, and these will be used inside the block. These are my 2 background solid white fabrics. One of them has already been marked with a diagonal line, and I'll show you how to mark the other one. You just place your ruler on the diagonal and get as close to the corner as you can. And I use a regular pencil and just draw that line. We'll take this and one of the accent fabrics, put them right sides together and line it up as best as you can. And do that for both of your accent fabrics. We'll take this to the machine and stitch a scant 1/4 of an inch. What I mean by scant 1/4 of an inch is slightly less than 1/4 of an inch. Since we're going to trim this down later, this doesn't have to be an exact 1/4 of an inch. And what a scant 1/4 of an inch gives you, it makes the block, the half square triangles, just a little bit bigger, so it's easier to trim them down. Later, we'll trim them down to 9.5 inches. Here is one of the 2 squares to put together, and I've stitched on either side of the drawn line, the diagonal line. And here's what it looks like. The line is here, and then I have my 2 lines of stitching on either side. Since I stitched a scant 1/4 of an inch, that means if I measure from this line to the stitching line on either side, it's going to be less than 1/4 of an inch. So let's put the edge of the ruler on the drawn line and look at the stitching. So if you see here, here's the line where the stitching should be, but the stitching is just inside that, making it just a little bit smaller. It's okay to do this because you still have plenty of seam allowance that you won't have to worry about the seams coming out later. But what this gives you is a little bit more room when you're going to trim these down to 9.5 inches. Take the ruler and cut on the drawn line. Then you have your 2 half square triangles like this. Press the seams open. Here are some that are already done. The seams are pressed open. Take our square ruler, trim it down to 9.5 inches. We'll use this diagonal line on the ruler and place it on the seam line here. My 0 point up here. So it's 1, 2, 3 this way and 1, 2, 3 that way. Lay the diagonal line on the seam line that we just sewed. And we want to make sure that we have 1/2 inch on the other 2 sides. So let me place it, then I'll show you what I mean. I have the diagonal line of the ruler laid right on top of the seam line of this half square triangle. On this edge over here, this is my 9.5 inch mark. I have just a little bitty tiny piece of fabric going beyond that, and that's okay. And then on this 9.5 inch line, I have a little piece of fabric going beyond that as well, and that's okay. Because see, we're very close to what we need to cut off. I'm just going to scooch this over a little bit to give me a little more room. And I have enough room here to trim on these sides. And trim the 2 sides on the 0 side, and you see it's barely trimmed. Again, we'll take this upper right side and rotate it down to the lower left side now. We know these are our trimmed sides. Put our 0 back up here, and these 2 sides we're going to line up the 9.5 inch mark. At the same time, we're lining up the 9.5 inch mark and then the diagonal line with the diagonal mark on the ruler, and we'll trim. So you see we have a very little bit here, and then a very little bit, if anything, over here. So that's all we've trimmed off, and that's a good thing. And do that to all 4 of your half square triangles. Trim them down to 9.5 inches. Use your square ruler to cut this light background into 4 at 4.5 inch pieces. What I do first is trim it down to 9 inches. I'm laying this ruler on the square, and I've got extra room here and here. These are the first two sides I'm going to cut. This is my 0 point, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 this way, 1, 2, 3, 4 this way. Then I look at these lines over here, and I see I have 9.5 inch line here is covering the fabric, and so is the 9.5 inch line here. It's covering the fabric. So I know I'm going to have enough fabric. And then I'll just trim this off. Now I'll take the ruler off. This was my 0 point here. This is trimmed and this is trimmed. I take this 0 point from the upper right and I'm going to rotate it down to the lower left here. Now I know that these two sides are trimmed. Take my ruler again and place the 9 inch mark on this side and down here. Then we're going to trim this down to 9 inches. Now that's 9 inch by 9 inch, and we would need 4 at 4.5 inches. Now we'll place the 4.5 inch mark here, cut this in half, and then turn it around, and we go from 4.5 inches. We put the 4.5 inch mark here, cut this in half. So here are our 4 squares at 4.5 inches. These are for the stitch and flip corners. We want to put a stitch and flip triangle here in the corner. You can use stitch and flip method or folded corner clipper method. For the stitch and flip method, we draw a diagonal line on the back of this one. We place it on this corner here. This is the edge we want to clip off. You stitch on this line, and then when that's finished, we'll trim it 1/4 inch. We'll put our 1/4 inch mark on the seam line and cut off this side here. Here's the stitching right on top of the drawn diagonal line. Take our ruler, put the 1/4 inch mark on the stitching line, and then trim off the excess. This is a lot of excess, and if you take this to your machine and stitch this line here, you'll have another half square triangle, and you can trim that down to whatever size you need. And a lot of people do that, and I do that when I have big triangles like this, and I'm going to have a lot of these for this quilt. So it's worth it to do that. Here is what your stitch and flip will look like once it's pressed. And do this for all 4 of your half square triangles. Here are a set of these half square triangles that are the cutoffs for the stitch and flip, and you can easily trim these down to 3.5 inches. You will get 3 inch finished half square triangles with these. And if you're making 12 blocks, you will have 48 of these half square triangles. So that adds up, and it's kind of, to me, it's worth going a little extra mile and sewing them together, pressing them, and trimming them. We have our 4 half square triangles, and the stitch and flip are done. We'll put them together, and it doesn't matter which side you put on which side. We're going to make our hourglass unit. Just be sure that you are alternating the fabrics. We're going to sew these 2 together and these 2 together, then press them and sew the 2 rows together. Here's our big giant hourglass block with the corners, the corner triangles. And you need to have at least an 18-inch mat to hold this whole thing. I want to show you how I cut it. This is a 2.5 inch ruler, and it's 18.5 inches long, as I said at the beginning of the video. And I'm placing the edge of this ruler along the seam line right down the middle. And that gives me 2.5 inches this way. And I'm going to cut. Before you lift your ruler up, make sure you're not moving it in any way. So I put my finger on one end, and I lift up the other end of the ruler and then lift it off. Put the ruler down, and we're going to rotate this clockwise or counterclockwise, whichever way you want. Just make sure you do it the same way each time. And we're going to cut it again. Lay it down, lay the edge of the ruler down on the seam line, 2.5 inches. Hold the ruler on this end and then lift up the edge over here so you don't move anything. Rotate it another time. Do the same thing. You're going to do this a total of 4 times. Put your finger down and lift up on this end. And then one more time. Let me show you how I lift it this time. Put the ruler down, cut. Okay, so I have my finger here, and I'm just grabbing, lifting up the very bottom of this ruler. Lift it up and lift it off. Now let's turn it back where this belongs. So we have our pieces are like this now. This center piece on all 4 sides we're going to flip. Pull it out and flip it this way. Flip, flip, and flip. Now you see your little star in the middle and all your alternating colors. Now you simply have 9 pieces you're going to stitch together. Stitch these units together for the first row, row 2 and row 3, stitch all those together. Press your seams and then stitch your rows all together and your block is finished. Here is one finished block. This may not be the block that I have been demoing because I made several of them. But here's the front and here's the back. And the one unfortunate thing about doing a block a day is that I don't have time to actually piece quilts, which I don't piece a lot of quilts these days, but this quilt I plan on making 12 blocks and set them 3 across and 4 down. And the instructions for 3 different quilt sizes will be on the second page of the pattern that you can download. So here is one block. This is block 5 actually. Here are 4 blocks put together. I'll just show you all of them. And they're all reds. There's the center with the 4 different triangles in the corner. This was a fun block to make. I hope you get a chance to grab some of your leftover 10-inch squares or cut some of your own and at least try one of these blocks. I think you'll be very pleased with it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.